am so excited because I think it's been about a year ago that Regie and I met and did a virtual webinar like this. And last time we talked about, we had a lovely conversation, actually. It was called A Lovely Conversation About Teaching Reading, and we discussed reading identities. Do you remember that, Regie?
Of course, I remember it.
It was such an honor, and I'm so excited to be back talking with you. And this time we're going to discuss something really that was really important too. And this time we're going to discuss something just as important. We're going to discuss the optimal learning model, responsive teaching. And this is something that I think is really relevant to everything we do as educators in our classrooms.
Absolutely. And a lot of people ask me, they probably ask you as well, and great to be seeing you and having this conversation together. And I think we both think about learning as a conversation, and so the conversation has to be meaningful, which applies, of course, to the curriculum that we're asking kids to follow and to create with us. So I created the optimal learning model probably several decades ago, building on the gradual release of responsibility that was created by Pearson and Gallagher in 1984. And people ask me, well, how is this different? And it is different. It builds on that. But I think for me, the biggest difference is that it's all about the learner. It's not so much about releasing responsibility to the student as it is about knowing the learners and knowing exactly how much guidance, demonstrations, shared experiences, hand-holding that we need to give that learner so that they can be successful. And being successful means that they can do it on their own. They're self-motivated, they're engaged, they're self-monitoring. And so how does that happen? And maybe we can just show you, we want to show you a couple of different models of the optimal learning model. One beautiful one that my beautiful colleague here came up with, very gifted in graphics. And then one that we're going to start with, which I hope will just make it clear what we're talking about, because we're hoping you'll come away with just a much better understanding of what this is, not so much the exact how-tos, because we've written about that. Valentina, in her wonderful book, Reading and Writing with English Learners, she's got all the how-to in there, and it's beautifully done. So if you don't know about her book, you're going to want to know about it. And then also in my book, which I'll just hold up to be equitable here. Oh, she's got it. Okay.
I've definitely got it. I really think I'm excited to hear from you, Regie, about the optimal learning model, because you're right. I wrote about the gradual release of responsibility in our book, but I think that the optimal learning model, like you said, is so much more student focused. And when we're working with multilingual learners, we have to know exactly where they are in instruction and respond to that
right
at the moment. And
the instruction has to be meaningful. And you and I were talking briefly before we started today about this quote that's become really meaningful to me. And the quote is actually by D.H. Lawrence. The eyes can't see what the mind doesn't know. And if you think about that, the eyes can't see what the mind doesn't know. So I'm going to show you the model and we'll talk our way through it, and Valentina will help me. We'll do it together. But if we don't know our students, if we don't know the curriculum, and it's not just the curriculum, the standards, but why we're doing what we're doing. If the work isn't relevant, none of this is going to matter at all. And that only happens, I think, through professional learning, which both of us do a lot of and believe in quite a bit, that we have to know what we're doing. So let me share my screen and just talk through this a little bit. Okay, so it's not just people kind of make fun of this and say, oh, this is just I do it, we do it, you do it. No, it's not. That's not what it's about. It is about helping students become independent, to become joyful learners, really is what it's about. And so you might start with a demonstration. So for instance, I'll tell you a little story about that. This morning, my husband and I were working in the garden because we are infested with rabbits. Now, I live in Seattle. This is a new problem. I used to think rabbits were cute, not so much anymore because they're eating my roses. They're eating they have a taste for vegetables and flowers, and they're doing a lot of harm in the garden. If I were working with young children or any age, I could write, and I wanted to write about what's going on in my life, I would write in front of them. I do it. I would have a big chart of paper. I still like that because you can see it the next day. It doesn't disappear. And I would orally say, and Valentina, just jump in at any point. I would orally talk about, I would tell the story first, starting with a whole. That whole is part of this. And then I would start to write it. And I might have the kids, I wouldn't have the kids help me with spelling or anything like that because I'm in charge. This is when I am showing them what it looks like to be a competent reader and writer. When I get over here, that's when we're doing it together. All right, so if we're looking at this, so if I'm telling you the story of rabbits, I might say something about, oh, kids, you won't believe this. And they'd see me writing it and they'd see me reading it. And then after I've written this really interesting stories about how rabbits that I used to think were cute, not so much now, are eating all of my favorite flowers, then I would have them read it with me. I would have them, what did you notice that I did? Because the fact that I did a demonstration is really not that meaningful. We have to assess, this is all about, at the same time, we're assessing, we're being responsive, what we call responsive teaching in action. Did they get it? Did they understand what I was doing? Did they see that I was thinking about my reader? When they write their stories about some adventure going on in their life, what might they do that they saw me do? But before they do it on their own, this is the part where people get confused. The we do it part, what that means is we're not expecting kids to be successful just because we did a fabulous demonstration. And this is particularly a problem, I think, as you go through the grades, where we show them what it looks like, we develop the criteria and the rubric maybe with them, and then, okay, kids, go do it. And that doesn't work out so well, right? So the we do it part is really, really critical. And then this part of the we do it, the teacher is still in charge, but the kids are invited to participate. So they're writing that message, that story, that nonfiction report with you. And all they have to do is contribute orally. And you can say something about that, Valentina, because that is so critical. I think with my work with English learners, and I don't have your knowledge in that field, but I work a lot with English learners. It's not all that different. They need more of everything that's good that we do. And that scaffolding is so critical, where they can just talk, they're smart, and they don't have to worry about reading or writing at that time.
Exactly. Yeah. They need that time to process what they know, to verbalize it, to hear from their peers as well, with the support of the teacher or the expert reader or writer there. So this part of the OLM, the optimal learning model, is very important for our students who are emergent bilinguals or multilingual learners. I'm glad you focused in on that and brought our attention directly on this.
This is so, so critical. And this is where the kids then begin to relax. There's no gotcha moments. There's no, I didn't do it right. Now, when we get to here, this is where people get confused. So I want you to think about guided reading, because we're talking about reading and writers. This is still the we do it part, but now the learner is in charge. So what does that mean? That means you have your guided reading crew. The kids are doing most of the work. So we're not just sitting in groups and reading out loud, but they're holding a book that you have selected and that that the kids can read, 95% of the words. You're working on comprehension. They're doing most of the work. So it's very different than what we normally see. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but that's a very big deal. Now, if you've done a fabulous job up here, a lot of reading aloud, talking about books, a lot of shared reading, a lot of shared writing to shared reading. And if those are new terms for you, you can look at my website for articles on that. You can look through Valentina's book. She's really made it explicit how you do that, shared reading and shared writing. So when they come here, they have already some sense of independence. You're not doing the work anymore. They're really doing it. And this is where you have your independent reading, but you are independent writing, but you're right there. You're still there. You're conferring with kids. You might still be meeting in small groups, but you're just available kind of on the side. But this is where the learning really happens, right? That they're doing this enormous amount of reading, of self-selected books from a wonderful classroom library that they've helped you put together. I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Show them your model.
I would love, yes,
Yeah,
I would
please.
love to add a little bit more to the learning that I gained from your optimal learning model, Regie. And so when I first saw it, I was blown away because you can really see the different levels of instruction, and that this type of model is completely interactive. So we're really focusing in on students, like Regie mentioned earlier. The first part is that demonstration and that direct instruction, so students can see exactly what that proficient reader or writer does, and we're giving them that direct instruction in whole group setting. And then we are doing that shared demonstration. As Regie, I love the way you gave us a concrete model of what that would look like with the rabbit story. That was really helpful for me as I listened in. Now here, as Regie explained, this is that handover. And as a visual, learner, I love to be very visual and think visually. I'm as Regie was sharing with us, I'm visualizing handing over that responsibility. First, I did the work of that shared writing in the story that Regie explained. Now I'm handing over the work to the learners. And as they practice with their partners or groups, I'm there to facilitate and support. Or we may be doing this as a whole group, but they're doing the heavy lifting here. And this amount of scaffolding and support is really optimal, and that's why it's called optimal. It is the perfect learning environment for students who are acquiring English, but it's going to really support all learners. So we're giving them just what they need to eventually be independent, to eventually do this work automatically, to do it naturally. But I want to also highlight that throughout this process, we are being cyclical, we are reteaching, we are assessing, we are celebrating even the smallest successes that we see in our students. And I learned this from Regie's model, the optimal learning model, and I implemented this work with students in my classroom and the students that I've coached over the years, English learners, native English speakers. And what I saw is that students gained success as they were reading and writing. That collaboration between one another, hearing other readers, hearing other writers as they brainstormed and started working on their writing selections, help them to become more proficient readers and writers through the process.
Absolutely. Let's go back side by side and let me add just a little bit. Oh, this is good. All right. So leave this up for a minute. This is really, really important because this is not a linear model. You could start with celebration. So let's say I had the kids go back after I've told my rabbit story, and then we've done some more demonstration by having kids share what they think they might write about. So they're not just, okay, I wrote my story, now you go back and write. I might start the lesson the next day with celebration. I've taken home, let's say where the kids had a certain amount of time to write, and I've taken home that writing and looked at it. I might start the next day with celebration. I might, because we got some great writing there, and then read some of that. So that's a very big thing. I might start by noticing and naming the learner's strengths. Here's what Mario did in his writing. Mario, I noticed that you used this technique that I used yesterday. Good for you. And somebody else did the same thing. And I'm not talking about, putting periods and commas in, and that's important. But again, this is whole part whole, a whole piece of writing, a whole text of reading, and then going in to teach the skills. So you are isolating, you can take words out of context, but then you want to put them back in context. And I know this is true for English learners as well. The easiest way to learn words is language that's familiar to them, that they have seen in a story that they have even helped write. Makes it a lot easier for them
Right.
to read those words. Another way to think about this, which I don't think we've said yet, it's a coaching model. Really, all good teaching is really about coaching, being an outstanding coach. And the first thing with being a coach is you've got to have this relationship with your kids. It's not just that you're overlaying this on an assignment, right? And I also think, yeah, we can take this down and get back side by side. What we're really talking about here is what I call front loading. It's doing everything that needs to be done so that the learner will be successful. And so, but again, it's not following a linear kind of thing. It might be that the front loading that needs to happen is that you're doing a public conference in writing in front of the class, and the kids are listening in, because all the stories are starting the same way. They're boring. Okay, hey kids, let's look at some first lines that famous authors, books that you've been reading, series you've been reading. Let's look at how they started their stories. They didn't just start it like, this is about a boy, or which could work depending on what the next line is, but really zeroing in on what good readers and good writers do is all part of the front loading process. So there's no limit to what that might be, right?
Right.
And
So
again, yeah, go ahead.
What I'm hearing you say is that we may be in the phase where we're sharing with readers and writers by modeling in front of them for a time, and then we may move them into a more guided practice, and we may move back into modeling again based on the feedback we get from our readers and writers.
And it's seamless. It's not like you're thinking in your head, oh, I need to do a shared reading exercise. You're thinking that the kids they're not independent enough. They're not ready to do this on their own yet. Another thing that's important, I think, is it's the least amount of support, but the best quality support that you're giving the learner so that that learner can be successful. And by successful, I mean competent. They feel confident. This is especially important now while we're living through historically anxious, difficult times, right? That we want to make it easy. We want to make it enjoyable so that the learners are engaging. And so I think that's what this model does. And it also involves masterful questioning. Let me just say that. So in the responsive assessment that's going on at the same time that you're teaching, are they hearing me? Are they understanding what this is about and what I'm expecting them to do? So the questions that we ask make a huge difference. So those questions should be able to, and the responses we get should guide us in terms of what they're learning. So I think we have to get really good at that. We have to get really good of observing learners. And that's why the professional learning, again, this is not like step 1, step 2, step 3. It's a cyclical, and you want a cyclical model, and you hold it in your head. I don't look at the model anymore. It's right here, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so, really our goal today was just to kind of simplify. Teaching is very complicated. Kind of how do we simplify it so that everybody does well? And this is really an easy model to use, but it depends on the knowledge of the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the richness of the curriculum and the relevance of it. It depends on how well we know our students.
Yeah.
It's not going to work if the student is feeling threatened or if they're hungry or, it all goes together. So it really is, it's an instructional model, it's a coaching model. I would say it's a relationship model too, giving a lot of tender, loving care right at the beginning and all through, which is necessary for all relationships, right, to just sustain themselves. It will make your teaching life much easier and much more enjoyable.
I agree with that completely. I'd like to put a pin on one thing that you said about the model, and that is that it's about giving students the least amount of support that they need, not the most, the least, because we want them to be able to do what they can do.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really important for us to recognize when
Well,
we're supporting students.
a really good point, because I think we sometimes give students too much support, right?
And for too long.
Or I've seen people like Scaffolded Conversations, which is one of my most powerful tools that I use for working with all learners, because it gives them so much confidence and we're helping them succeed. We're helping them say their language. They really can't get it wrong. But the questions that we ask are really critical here, because if we're asking somebody who's just an English learner, or an emergent learner in any language, multilingual, if we're asking questions that are, and they're not responding to the questions, and we just keep asking more questions, which is, I see teachers do that, that's not helpful. But if we ask a question that we can then help shape the answer to, how about if we say it this way? What about if you start with these words? We can't just ask them to do stuff without providing all the support that they need and not overdoing it. So, it's a delicate dance that we're doing. Yeah, but it's fun.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
everybody gets to dance, it's like there's nobody left out, and that's a big part of it. And we haven't mentioned equity. And so this is, and there's so much, both of us, that's uppermost of mind. It's an equitable model, because if you do it, quote, right, with a lot of teacher knowledge, a lot of understanding about your kids, everybody's going to do well. So the equitable part is you're not going to be using texts that are so difficult that they can't understand them, or so easy that you are insulting their intelligence, right? And also the choice part, that they have some say in what it is that we're reading and writing. That's all part of equity. It's really about good teaching and, what should we say, being a good person in the classroom to these students that we're lucky enough to have for that, however much time we have them.
It's definitely one of the best coaching models I've seen, and most effective ways to serve students, not just as readers and writers, but in all content areas, I would say. So I'm really excited that we got to do this again, Regie, and hopefully we'll get to do another one. Maybe it'll be a series. We talked about identity. We talked about the OLM. Maybe we'll do another one sometime soon.
Possible. You're a very persuasive lady. You got us going on this. So to everybody that's watching, have a wonderful day. And I would say the OLM applies to your life. If you want your loved ones to be doing things a different way, you're going to have to show them how and do it together and give them a little guidance. It really does apply to the way we live our lives, I think, and the people we love.
Think about that now. That's a good idea. I'm gonna start thinking about how I can use that.
Well, I've been married a long time, so I have a few tricks. Okay.
Thank you for that life advice as well, Regie.
Thank you. Good to be together.
Thank you, everyone.